30 days. Tear down this mansion or we'll do it for you. You're threatening to demolish property you don't own.
This HOA decides what happens on this lake. No, Richard,
The HOA gave me exactly 30 days to demolish my custom-built lakefront mansion. They decided they wanted a community boat ramp right where my living room stood. But their power-hungry board missed one monumental detail. I didn't just own the house. I owned their entire damn neighborhood. Sit tight. I never wanted neighbors. That was the whole point of buying the land in the first place. Back in 1998, long before the urban sprawl reached the quiet shores of Lake Oconee, I purchased a pristine, untouched 600-acre tract of dense Georgia pine and deep water shoreline. I was 28, having just sold my first tech startup, and all I wanted was peace. I spent 2 years designing and building my dream home on the prime 50-acre peninsula that jutted out into the deepest part of the lake. The house was a masterpiece of rustic architecture, 8,000 square feet of hand-hewn cedar, riverstone, and floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass that offered panoramic views of the water. For nearly 15 years, it was paradise, but maintaining 600 acres of forest is a full-time job, and a local real estate developer named Thomas Whitmore eventually made me an offer I couldn't refuse. He wanted to buy 550 acres to build a luxury gated community called Crescent Cove. I agreed to the sale, but with a few ironclad conditions woven directly into the master deeds. I retained absolute ownership of my 50-acre peninsula. Furthermore, because of the complex environmental zoning laws regarding the lakefront, I retained ownership of the land beneath the private roads, the community shoreline, and the master covenants. Essentially, the homeowners association that Thomas set up to manage the neighborhood leased the community infrastructure from me for $1 a year. The master deed explicitly stated that my property was forever exempt from the HOA and that I held ultimate veto power over the land use. Thomas finished the development, sold the lots to wealthy doctors, lawyers, and retirees, and eventually handed the reins over to the residents. For a few years, everything was fine. I kept to myself, driving my beat-up 2004 Ford F-150 into town, wearing my usual faded flannel shirts and work boots. To the new, wealthy residents of Crescent Cove, I was just the eccentric old guy living at the end of the point. None of them knew my history, and none of them bothered to read the foundational documents of their own neighborhood. Then came the election of Richard Caldwell. Richard was a retired corporate executive from Chicago, the kind of man who slicked back his graying hair and treated everyone like a subordinate. He drove a leased Mercedes, wore golf polos that were one size too tight, and carried himself with an unearned, aggressive arrogance. He ran for HOA president unopposed, bringing his loyal sycophant, Brenda Montgomery, along as vice president. Brenda was a woman whose entire personality revolved around her clipboard, excessive floral perfume, and pointing out minor lawn infractions. Almost overnight, the tone of Crescent Cove changed. The HOA fees skyrocketed. New draconian rules were implemented regarding the approved shades of beige for mailboxes and the exact permissible height of front yard grass. I ignored it all, safely tucked away behind my heavy iron gate, completely immune to their jurisdiction. Or so, I thought. The trouble started on a humid Tuesday in late July. I was down by my private dock, repairing a frayed mooring line, when I heard the distinct crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. I walked up the embankment to find Richard Caldwell and Brenda Montgomery standing outside my security gate. Brenda was aggressively writing on her clipboard, while Richard was rattling my gate, trying to force it open. "Can I help you?" I asked, wiping grease from my hands onto a rag. Richard squinted at me, clearly unimpressed by my work clothes. "Are you the homeowner, or just the groundskeeper?" "I own the property," I said flatly. "And you're trespassing on a private easement." "I am the president of the Crescent Cove Homeowners Association." Richard puffed out his chest, completely ignoring my warning. We're doing a comprehensive audit of the community's shoreline boundaries. Your perimeter fence is in direct violation of the new community bylaws. Furthermore, this entire peninsula is an eyesore. Your trees are obstructing the lake views for the houses on Ridgeview Lane. I stared at him, genuinely thinking it was a joke. My trees have been here for 200 years, Richard, and I'm not part of your HOA. Brenda scoffed, stepping forward. Every property within the gated perimeter of Crescent Cove is subject to the HOA, Mr. Pendleton. We checked the county plat map. You share our main entrance gate. Therefore, you are in our jurisdiction. I'm issuing you a formal warning for unauthorized landscaping, an unapproved perimeter fence, and failure to pay HOA dues. She shoved a bright pink piece of paper through the iron bars of the gate. It fluttered to the dirt. I strongly suggest you read that, Richard sneered. You have 14 days to remove this gate and cut down those pines. If you don't, we will fine you $500 a day until you comply. I strongly suggest you go back to the county clerk's office and read the master deed, Richard, I replied, not breaking eye contact. I don't belong to your club. Don't come back to this gate. I turned and walked away, leaving the pink paper in the dirt. I assumed that a man who claimed to have run a Fortune 500 division would have the basic intelligence to consult a real estate attorney before picking a fight over property lines. I was wrong. Richard's arrogance was only eclipsed by his profound ignorance. He didn't check the master deed. Instead, he decided I was just a stubborn, uneducated local who needed to be broken. That single moment of pride was the beginning of the most spectacular, financially ruinous mistake of his life. I didn't hear from Richard or Brenda for a week. I assumed they had finally done their homework, realized my property was legally untouchable, and backed off to terrorize someone else over an unauthorized garden gnome. But I had underestimated the sheer delusion of the Crescent Cove HOA board. Exactly 8 days after our confrontation at the gate, I woke up to a bizarre buzzing sound outside my master bedroom window. I walked out onto my second-story balcony to see a large, high-end drone hovering no more than 20 feet away, its camera lens pointed directly into my house. Down on the lake, idling in a pontoon boat, was Martha Gable, the newly appointed head of the HOA's Architectural Compliance Committee. She had the drone's remote control in her hands and was actively surveying my private property. I didn't yell. I didn't grab a shotgun. I simply walked back inside, grabbed my high-resolution DSLR camera, attached my telephoto lens, and took crystal-clear photos of Martha, the boat's registration numbers, and the drone hovering near my window. I documented everything. When she realized she was being photographed, she panicked, nearly crashed the drone into a pine tree, and sped off toward the community marina. The next morning, the certified letters began arriving. They weren't just standard warnings anymore. They were legal threats typed on official Crescent Cove HOA letterhead. The first letter claimed my home was an unauthorized structure built on community recreational land. The second letter was an accumulated fine notice, demanding $14,500 in backdated HOA dues, late fees, and penalties. But the third letter was the masterpiece. It was a formal notice of eminent domain and intent to demolish. I sat at my kitchen island, sipping black coffee, reading the document in absolute disbelief. The letter, signed by Richard Caldwell, claimed that the HOA had voted to expand the community's lake access. They had determined that my 50-acre peninsula was the only viable location for the new Crescent Cove Marina and clubhouse. Because I had illegally occupied the land, according to their twisted interpretation of a deeply flawed, unfiled 2005 surveyor's sketch that the developer had long ago discarded. They were giving me exactly 30 days to vacate the premises and demolish my $8 million home at my own expense. If I failed to comply, the HOA would hire bulldozers, tear down my house, seize the land, and bill me for the demolition costs. It was so legally absurd, so detached from the reality of property law that I actually laughed out loud. HOAs do not possess the power of eminent domain. They are not government entities. Even if I was part of their HOA, which I wasn't, they couldn't just vote to steal my house. I decided it was time to see exactly how deep this delusion ran. The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for that Thursday evening at the community center. I put on my usual flannel shirt, grabbed a manila folder containing the original master deed, and drove my dusty truck up the hill. The community center was packed. At least 100 residents were seated in folding chairs. At the front of the room stood Richard Caldwell, looking like a low-rent Steve Jobs, complete with a headset microphone and a massive projector screen. Brenda Montgomery sat nearby, furiously typing on a laptop. "Moving on to our primary agenda item for the evening," Richard announced, his voice booming through the speakers. "The Crescent Cove Marina project." He clicked a button on a remote, and the projector illuminated. My jaw tightened. On the screen was a highly detailed, professional architectural rendering of my peninsula. My house had been entirely photoshopped out. In its place was a massive 2-story glass clubhouse, a paved parking lot with space for 60 cars, and a sprawling wooden dock system that wrapped around my private shoreline. The crowd erupted into applause. "As you all know, our community has outgrown our current boat ramp," Richard continued smoothly, pacing the stage. "We need a facility that reflects the prestige of Crescent Cove. For years, the prime real estate on the point has been occupied by an eyesore. A non-compliant, rusted-out property owned by a squatter who has refused to pay his dues or adhere to our standards." I stood leaning against the back wall, arms crossed, watching the residents nod in agreement. They were entirely brainwashed. "We have initiated formal proceedings," Richard declared proudly. "The individual in question has been given 30 days to demolish the structure. Once the land is cleared, we will break ground on the new marina. We've already secured a $2.5 million line of credit from the bank to fund the construction, using the community's collective property values as collateral." That caught my attention. They had taken out a multi-million-dollar loan based on land they didn't own. I raised my hand and stepped out of the shadows. "Richard, a quick question from the floor." The room went dead silent as 100 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. Richard sneered, grabbing the microphone. "Mr. Pendleton, how brave of you to show up. Have you come to hand over the keys?" "I've come to ask, who the hell approved a bank loan without running a simple title search?" I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. "You can't build a marina on land you don't own, and you certainly can't order the demolition of a private estate." "We own the land, Pendleton," Brenda shouted from her laptop station. "We found the 2005 plat maps. It clearly shows the peninsula as future community recreation area. A discarded sketch from 20 years ago doesn't supersede a recorded deed, Brenda," I replied calmly. "I suggest you call the county clerk. If you send a bulldozer to my property, it will be considered criminal trespassing and destruction of property. I'm warning you right now, in front of all these witnesses. Stop this." Richard laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. "You're done, old man. We have the lawyers. We have the funding. You have 28 days left. If you aren't gone by the 1st of the month, we will pave right over you." I looked around the room. Not a single neighbor spoke up to defend me. They just stared at me with greed in their eyes, eager for their new clubhouse. "All right," I nodded slowly, slipping my manila folder back into my jacket. "Don't say I didn't warn you." I walked out of the community center, the sound of Richard Caldwell's smug laughter echoing behind me. As soon as I got into my truck, I didn't drive home. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of Jonathan Croft, the most ruthless, expensive real estate litigator in the state of Georgia. "Jonathan," I said when he picked up, "the HOA just threatened to bulldoze my house, and they took out a $2.5 million loan using my underlying land as collateral." Jonathan paused. I could almost hear him smiling on the other end of the line. "Arthur, do they know?" They have absolutely no idea, I replied. Let them bring the bulldozers, Jonathan chuckled. We're going to take everything they have. Jonathan Croft's office was located in a sleek, glass-paneled high-rise in downtown Atlanta, a stark contrast to my rustic lakefront existence. Jonathan was a shark in a bespoke suit, a man who lived for the intricate, bloody battles of real estate litigation. When I walked into his boardroom the morning after the community meeting, he already had the original 1,998 master deed for Crescent Cove spread across the mahogany table, alongside a stack of property plat maps and a fresh pot of coffee. Arthur, my friend, Jonathan smiled, a predatory gleam in his eye. I spent the entire night reviewing the foundational documents. What Richard Caldwell and his board are attempting isn't just illegal. It's aggressively, comically suicidal. I sat down, pouring myself a cup of black coffee. Explain it to me in terms I can use to destroy them. Jonathan walked over to a whiteboard, uncaping a red marker. When you sold those 550 acres to Thomas Whitmore, you didn't just sell the land and walk away. You protected yourself. You retained the deed to the 50-acre peninsula. Yes, but more importantly, because of the lake's strict environmental watershed regulations, you retained the fee-simple title to the land beneath the subdivision's infrastructure. He began drawing a rough map of the neighborhood, the paved roads, the underground utility easements, the front security gate, the community clubhouse, and the shoreline buffer zone. You own all of it, Jonathan explained, tapping the whiteboard. The Crescent Cove Homeowners Association operates solely on a 99-year ground lease that you granted the developer. They lease the very ground they drive on from you for $1 single a year. And the master deed, I prompted, remembering the ironclad stipulations my previous lawyers had drafted. Exactly, Jonathan nodded, returning to the table. Section 4. Paragraph B of the Master Covenants. The lease is contingent upon the HOA adhering strictly to the boundaries of the deed. It explicitly states that any attempt by the leaseholder to seize, alter, or damage the grantor's retained property, that's your peninsula, constitutes an immediate, non-curable default of the lease agreement. I leaned back in my leather chair, letting the magnitude of the situation wash over me. So, by officially voting to demolish my house and seize my land, they have triggered the termination clause of their own existence, Jonathan finished smoothly. But it gets better. Remember that $2.5 million line of credit Richard bragged about securing? I do. He said they used the community's property values as collateral. They lied to the bank, Jonathan said, pulling a financial document from his briefcase. I had an associate pull the public filings this morning. Richard Caldwell and Brenda Montgomery signed loan documents claiming the HOA owned the shoreline free and clear. That is, textbook bank fraud. If the bank discovers the HOA doesn't actually own the land they used to secure the loan, the bank will immediately call the note due. The HOA will be bankrupt overnight. So, what's our move? I asked. Do we send them a cease and desist? Jonathan shook his head, his smile widening into something genuinely dangerous. Never interrupt an enemy when they are making a mistake, Arthur. If we warn them now, they might back down. They might try to wriggle out of it. We need them to commit. We need them to cross the line from threatening to acting. We let them spend the money. We let them bring the bulldozers. And the moment they strike the match, we burn their entire corrupt kingdom to the ground. Over the next 3 weeks, I followed Jonathan's advice to the letter. I became a ghost on my own property, silently documenting every single infraction, every trespass, and every escalating act of harassment orchestrated by the Crescent Cove HOA. Richard and Brenda were drunk on their own perceived power. Convinced that my silence was a sign of surrender, they accelerated their plans. The harassment was relentless and highly coordinated. Day 12. Martha Gable flew her drone over my property again, this time dropping hundreds of neon green flyers onto my lawn that read, "Final notice, eviction pending, comply or be demolished." I calmly gathered them up, placed them in a sealed evidence bag, and sent them to Jonathan. Day 18. A heavy-duty commercial landscaping crew arrived at my iron gate. They had been hired by Brenda Montgomery to clear the brush along my driveway to make room for the upcoming construction vehicles. I walked down to the gate and had a very polite conversation with the crew foreman, a rugged guy named Mike Reynolds. When I showed Mike my property deed and warned him that he was about to commit criminal trespassing, he turned pale, ordered his men back into their trucks, and drove away, cursing Richard Caldwell's name. Day 22. The HOA went to the local utility company and attempted to have my water and electricity shut off, claiming the property was abandoned and slated for demolition. Fortunately, the utility manager was an old fishing buddy of mine. He called me immediately, laughing at the sheer audacity of the request. He flagged my account with a password so no one could tamper with my services. Day 26. The most egregious act occurred just 4 days before the deadline. Richard hired a private surveying company to pound wooden stakes with neon pink ribbons into my pristine front lawn, marking the outlines of his imaginary marina clubhouse. They also erected a massive, professionally painted wooden sign right next to my security gate that read, "Future home of the Crescent Cove Luxury Marina." I documented every stake, every ribbon, and the massive sign. My security cameras caught Richard personally directing the surveyors, pointing at my house and laughing with his cronies. He was spending the bank's money like it was water, paying non-refundable deposits to catering companies, marine contractors, and architects. He even hired a PR firm to draft a press release for the local newspaper about the community's bold new expansion. On the evening of day 29, the night before the deadline, I sat on my back porch, watching the sun set over the calm waters of Lake Oconee. My phone buzzed on the side table. It was Jonathan. "Are you ready, Arthur?" he asked, the anticipation crackling in his voice. "I'm ready," I replied, taking a sip of iced tea. "The stage is set. I've already filed the paperwork with the county judge. The injunctions are signed, sealed, and waiting in my briefcase," Jonathan said. "I'll be at your gate tomorrow morning at 8:45 a.m. sharp. I'm bringing Sheriff Winston with me. Let's give Mr. Caldwell the groundbreaking ceremony he deserves." The morning of day 30 dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect southern summer morning that made living on the lake an absolute dream. I woke up early, brewed a strong pot of coffee, and dressed comfortably in a clean pair of dark jeans, my favorite worn-in leather boots, and a crisp white button-down shirt. If I was going to evict an entire neighborhood, I figured I should at least look presentable. At exactly 8 a.m., the low, rumbling roar of heavy diesel engines shattered the morning peace. I walked out to my second-story balcony and looked down the long, winding driveway toward my front gate. It was a spectacle of staggering arrogance. Leading the procession was a massive, yellow Caterpillar D8 bulldozer, its steel blade gleaming in the morning sun. Behind it was a large flatbed truck carrying a heavy-duty excavator, followed by a fleet of shiny luxury SUVs. Richard Caldwell had turned my illegal eviction into a neighborhood block party. A large white catering tent had been erected just outside my property line on the community road. Waiters in black vests were serving mimosas, Bloody Marys, and pastries to a crowd of about 60 cheering Crescent Cove residents. Martha Gable was there, wearing a sun hat and holding a camera. Brenda Montgomery was marching around with her omnipresent clipboard, directing the catering staff and checking off names. And there, standing in the center of it all, was Richard Caldwell. He was wearing a spotless white hard hat and actually holding a gold-painted shovel. He looked like a politician posing for a campaign photo. I walked downstairs, grabbed the thick manila envelope resting on my kitchen counter, and strolled slowly down the gravel driveway toward the gate. The heavy iron bars of my security fence stood between me and the mob. As I approached, The crowd noticed me. A hush fell over the residents. The music from the caterer's speakers was abruptly turned off. Richard stepped forward, a triumphant, sneering grin plastered across his face. He tapped the gold shovel against the iron bars of my gate. "Well, well, well," Richard boomed, projecting his voice so the entire crowd could hear. "Look who finally decided to come out of his little shack. Time's up, Pendleton. The 30 days are over. I told you we were going to pave right over you, and here we are." The crowd chuckled, sipping their mimosas. "Richard," I said calmly, resting my hands on the gate, "this is your absolute final warning. Take this machinery, take your party, and get off my easement. If that bulldozer touches this gate, your life as you know it is over." Brenda scoffed loudly from the back. "Don't listen to him, Richard. He's just trying to stall. He doesn't have a leg to stand on." Richard puffed out his chest, turning to play to his audience. "You hear that, folks? The squatter is giving us warnings. We own this land. We have the permits. We have the funding." He turned back to me, his eyes cold and hard. "You chose to do this the hard way. Now, you get to watch us tear down your life." Richard raised his hand and signaled the bulldozer operator. "Hank, fire it up. Take down the gate." The operator, a burly man in a neon safety vest, hesitated. He leaned out of the cab, looking nervously between me, the iron gate, and Richard. "Mr. Caldwell, sir, you're sure about the permits? Taking down an occupied residential gate is a massive liability." "I am the president of the HOA, Richard screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "I gave you an order. Drive that machine through those gates right now, or I'll sue your company into the ground." Hank grimaced, pulled a lever, and the massive diesel engine roared, belching black smoke into the pristine morning air. The heavy steel tracks squealed as the bulldozer lurched forward, closing the distance to my gate. 10 feet, 8 feet, 5 feet. Way-oh, way-oh, way-oh. The piercing wail of a police siren cut through the roar of the machinery. 3 county sheriff's cruisers, lights flashing blindingly blue and red, came tearing around the bend of the neighborhood road, kicking up dust and scattering the catered party. Right behind the cruisers was a sleek black Mercedes S-Class. Hank slammed on the brakes of the bulldozer, the steel blade stopping mere inches from my iron gate. The cruisers boxed in the heavy machinery, effectively trapping the bulldozer and the excavator. Car doors slammed open. Sheriff Winston, a no-nonsense lawman I had known for 20 years, stepped out of the lead vehicle. He adjusted his duty belt and glared at the crowd. Jonathan Croft stepped out of the black Mercedes, buttoning his suit jacket. He carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to sink a ship. Richard lowered his gold shovel, looking confused but still arrogant. He marched toward the sheriff. "Ah, Sheriff Winston. Excellent timing. We called the precinct yesterday to request a civil standby for an eviction, but they said they were understaffed. I appreciate you showing up to handle this squatter." Sheriff Winston looked at Richard like he was an insect. "Mr. Caldwell, I suggest you shut your mouth and step away from the heavy machinery." "Excuse me?" Richard bristled. "I am the HOA president. We are conducting official community business on our property." "You aren't on your property, Richard." Jonathan Croft's voice sliced through the tension like a razor blade. He walked right past Richard, approached my gate, and nodded at me. "Morning, Arthur." "Morning, Jonathan," I replied, unlocking the pedestrian side gate and stepping out to join them. The crowd of residents was deathly silent now. The mimosas were forgotten. "Who the hell are you?" Brenda demanded, marching up to Jonathan, her clipboard shaking slightly. "My name is Jonathan Croft. I am the senior legal counsel for Mr. Arthur Pendleton," Jonathan said clearly, turning to face the entire crowd. "And I am here to formally inform you that as of 8 a.m. this morning, the Crescent Cove Homeowners Association has been legally dissolved, its assets frozen, and its board members placed under criminal investigation. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Richard dropped the gold shovel. It hit the pavement with a dull, hollow clang. "That's a lie," Richard sputtered, his confidence finally cracking. "We are a legally incorporated entity. We have rights. We own this community." Jonathan casually opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents as thick as a phone book. "You own the structures you built on your individual quarter-acre lots, Mr. Caldwell," Jonathan corrected smoothly. "However, the land beneath this very street you are standing on, the shoreline you claim to manage, the community center you meet in, and the front gates you drive through every day, belong exclusively to Mr. Pendleton." Jonathan handed a copy of the 1998 master deed to Richard. Richard stared at it, his hands beginning to tremble as his eyes scanned the bold legal text. "Your entire neighborhood operates on a ground lease," Jonathan continued, his voice ringing out for every resident to hear. "A lease that strictly prohibited any attempt to seize, alter, or harass the master title holder. By taking out a $2.5 million bank loan using Mr. Pendleton's land as collateral, you committed bank fraud. By ordering heavy machinery to demolish his private property, you attempted criminal destruction. As per Section 4 of your master covenants, your actions have triggered an immediate, non-negotiable termination of your ground lease." Jonathan pulled out a second document, complete with a bright red judge's seal, and slammed it against Richard's chest. Richard reflexively grabbed it. "That is a court-ordered eviction notice, signed by a Superior Court judge at 7:30 this morning." Jonathan smiled coldly. "The HOA is evicted from Mr. Pendleton's land. The private roads of Crescent Cove are now permanently closed to all non-essential traffic. The community clubhouse is officially condemned, and the front security gate will be locked at sundown tonight." The crowd erupted into absolute pandemonium. The silence that followed Jonathan's declaration was deafening. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the suffocating, heavy air of a realization that a fantasy had just been violently shattered. The residents, who minutes ago were clinking glasses and celebrating their imminent conquest of my land, now looked like deer caught in a massive, legal spotlight. Richard Caldwell looked as if he were aging in real time. The color had drained from his face, leaving a sallow gray complexion that matched his expensive, now useless suit. He looked at the court order in his hand, his eyes darting back and forth, as if hoping the text would magically rearrange itself into a victory. It didn't. This is just a procedural issue," Richard stammered, his voice cracking. He turned to the crowd, his hands shaking. "Don't listen to him. This is a scare tactic. We're Crescent Cove. We have the best lawyers in the state." "You had a legal team, Richard," Jonathan interrupted, his tone bored, as if he were discussing a minor grocery list. "They resigned an hour ago when they saw the evidence of the bank fraud you committed. And that's not even the worst of it. The sheriff isn't just here to serve the eviction. He's here to execute the arrest warrants for you and Miss Montgomery." Sheriff Winston stepped forward, his expression grave. He didn't enjoy doing this, but he was a creature of the law, and the law had been violated in spectacular fashion. He didn't even use handcuffs. He simply gestured toward the cruiser. "Richard, Brenda, let's make this easy." Brenda Montgomery let out a high-pitched, hysterical sob, her clipboard clattering to the pavement. The neon green flyers, the symbols of her petty tyranny, scattered into the grass, caught by the morning breeze. She was led away, still muttering about HOA bylaws and unauthorized landscaping. Richard, for his part, went limp. He didn't fight, he didn't shout. He just walked toward the police car, the gold-painted shovel still lying in the dust where he'd dropped it, a perfect monument to his vanity. As the police cruisers pulled away, the crowd didn't disperse. They were paralyzed. They didn't know what to do. Then, a black sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the blockade. Out stepped a man in a charcoal suit, clutching a leather briefcase. It was Mr. Abernathy, the regional VP of the bank, that had extended the $2.5 million line of credit to the HOA. He didn't look at the residents. He walked straight to Jonathan and me. "Mr. Pendleton," Abernathy said, offering a curt, businesslike nod. "We've seen the documents. The collateral you hold the land is indeed yours, unencumbered by any legitimate HOA claim. The loan was approved under false pretenses. We are declaring the note in immediate default. The HOA has zero assets. We will be seizing the community clubhouse and the marina construction equipment as partial repayment, but the rest of the debt falls squarely on the board members personally." He turned to the crowd of stunned homeowners. "The Crescent Cove Homeowners Association is dissolved, effective immediately. If you wish to maintain your private roads or street lighting, you will need to negotiate a new lease with Mr. Pendleton directly, and I would suggest you do it quickly, as the utility easements are technically being shut off as we speak." The dominoes fell with brutal efficiency. The next few months were a masterclass in the consequences of arrogance. The prestige of Crescent Cove evaporated overnight. Without the HOA to manage the roads, the streetlights went dark. The landscaping stopped. The expensive gated entrance, which had been part of my property all along, was welded shut. If the residents wanted to reach their homes, they had to call me. I didn't make it easy, and I certainly didn't make it cheap. I turned the entire neighborhood into a fee-for-service arrangement. If they wanted the lights on, they paid the power company directly through my master account, plus a management fee that I used to upgrade the security on my own perimeter. If they wanted the roads paved, they paid for the asphalt. I kept the original 50-acre peninsula strictly gated and private. No clubs, no marinas, no boat ramps. Just the silence of the pines and the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. Richard and Brenda were eventually convicted of felony fraud and conspiracy. They didn't go to prison, but they were bankrupted by the legal fees and civil judgments. They sold their homes for a fraction of what they were worth and moved out of the county. The other residents, once eager to tear down my house, became the most compliant, quietest neighbors I could have ever asked for. They finally understood that the old guy in the flannel shirt wasn't a squatter. He was the landlord of their entire existence. I still live on the point. My house is exactly where it was. The trees are taller now, and the house has aged into a beautiful, weathered silver gray. I still drive my old truck. I still walk down to the dock every morning to watch the sun rise over the water. There are no more HOA meetings, no more drones, no more neon green warning signs. Just the quiet, absolute peace of knowing that I was the one who held the deed, the one who held the power, and the one who had the last laugh. Sometimes, when a new neighbor moves in and thinks about starting a committee, I just send them a copy of the original 1998 master deed. They never try again. Justice isn't always swift, but sometimes it is incredibly satisfying. I turned a neighborhood's greed into a lifetime of ironclad privacy, proving that the loudest people in the room are rarely the ones who actually own the room. If you enjoyed this story of malicious compliance and sweet, sweet revenge, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your favorite group chat. Stay vigilant, know your rights, and never let a bully win.